This video is part 2 of the story. If you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend watching it first, as this chapter continues directly from the previous events and contains important details that will help you understand the journey ahead in the tale of the villain who fell in love with a dead prince. Previously, a villain inherited the life of a prince, but as hidden truths emerged, so did feelings that should have never existed. And now, the story continues. Chapter 5, The Spider Behind the Throne. For 3 days, Hector barely left Adrian's secret room. Years of journals, years of hidden reports, years of observations. Adrian had spent his life gathering fragments without knowing what picture they formed. Hector only needed 3 days to recognize all the hidden patterns, because he had built empires by recognizing patterns. At first, he thought the queen was the center of everything. Then he realized she wasn't. Neither were the nobles, not even the king. They were merely pieces, useful pieces, but pieces nonetheless. As Hector arranged hundreds of names, dates, military transfers, trade agreements, and marriage records across the walls, one pattern appeared again and again. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Every major event somehow benefited the same invisible hand. Hector's fingers stopped. Then a smile slowly appeared. There you are. And what he found made even him pause. The queen's rise to power, merchant guild wars, the fall of noble houses, royal marriages, military appointments, border conflicts, assassinations, economic collapses. Entire governments had been nudged into making decisions they believed were their own. A king trusted his wife. A duke trusted his advisors. A merchant trusted his partners. And behind all of them, someone had quietly whispered the right words to the right people. Never seen, never blamed, never questioned. The Black Veil, a network without borders, operating across half the continent. And at its center sat a man who officially did not exist. Cassian Valmont. He never sat on a throne, never commanded armies, never declared wars. He simply arranged circumstances, and people destroyed each other on his behalf. 20 years earlier, he had noticed a young noblewoman with ambition. He guided her toward the palace, created opportunities, introduced acquaintances, removed obstacles. Eventually, she became the king's favorite consort, then the queen. Even she probably believed she had achieved everything through her own talent. Cassian never needed to control the king. Controlling the person beside him was enough. It was elegant, patient, terrifying, and Hector found himself smiling. You're good. For the first time in years, I'm actually impressed. Unfortunately for Cassian, Hector liked breaking impressive things. And so, the Crown Prince changed, at least from the court's perspective. Before his poisoning, Adrian was respectful. After awakening, he became unpredictable, which terrified politicians. One noble learned that lesson during a banquet. Your Highness seems healthier than expected. The man smiled. I feared the poison had damaged your judgment. Several nobles laughed. Hector smiled pleasantly. Perhaps. He picked up his wine glass. By the way, Lord Mervyn. The noble froze. How is your secret grain warehouse? Silence. And your bribed officials? The laughter disappeared. Hector sipped his wine. Relax. I'm sure none of your allies know. The noble nearly fainted. 3 weeks later, his own faction destroyed itself. Hector never lifted a finger. People were remarkably efficient at ruining themselves. And that became the story of the entire court. Corrupt nobles exposed each other. Merchants betrayed partners. The queen's supporters began accusing one another. Hector simply drank tea and read reports. One afternoon, his head maid found him laughing. Tea almost came out of his nose. Good news, Your Highness? She asked carefully. Hector wiped his mouth. 3 dukes are threatening to murder each other. The maid blinked. Should I congratulate Your Highness? Excellent idea. She decided, for the sake of her mental health, never to ask questions again. Months passed. The kingdom stabilized. And then, right on schedule, the official order arrived. The Crown Prince would lead the army north. Officially, it was an honor. Unofficially, it was an execution. Hector looked at the order, then laughed. His secretary, William, immediately became nervous. Your Highness? Yes. Should I be worried? No. Then perhaps are you angry? No. Then why are you smiling? Hector folded the document. Tell me, William. Yes, Your Highness? If someone spends 20 years preparing a trap for you, William swallowed. Yes. Wouldn't it be rude not to attend? William stared, then wondered if the poison had affected the Crown Prince's brain after all. That night, Hector stood before the investigation board. His eyes settled on a single name, Cassian Valmont. The man had studied everyone. The king, the queen, the nobles, the military, even Adrian Aurelius. And that was his greatest mistake, because his 20 years of preparation were based on Adrian, not Hector Carmine. The former king of the Underworld looked toward the northern horizon, toward the battlefield waiting for him, toward the trap, and instead of concern, he felt excitement. Cassian Valmont. His smile slowly widened. You spent 20 years building your game. Impressive. Now let's see how well it survives an unexpected player. Far away, beyond the borders, Cassian sat before a fireplace reading reports. One report mentioned instability among noble factions. Another, unusual financial movements. Another, strange incidents inside the Queen's faction. Nothing alarming. Nothing significant. Just wrong. Like finding a chess piece slightly out of place. For the first time in 20 years. Cassian frowned. And thousands of miles away, Hector smiled, because he had accomplished something very few people ever managed. He had made a monster uncomfortable. And once, Hector found an opening. He never let go. Chapter 6. Things he couldn't explain. For the first time in his life, Hector Carmine had a problem he couldn't solve, and he hated it. The problem wasn't Cassian or the Queen. It wasn't the coming war. It wasn't even the dozens of assassination attempts he was currently preparing for. The problem was Adrian, or more specifically, his feelings regarding Adrian, because they were becoming increasingly strange. One night Hector found himself unable to sleep. Not unusual. He had never slept much, even in his previous life. What was unusual was what he was doing, or rather, what he caught himself doing. He was sitting at his desk, holding a pen, staring at a blank sheet of paper, for several minutes. Why am I here? He questioned to no one. Silence answered. Then a memory surfaced. Adrian sitting in the hidden room, writing letters to his mother. Letters he would never send. Letters he knew would never receive replies. Yet he wrote them anyway. Hector stared at the paper, then at the pen, then back at the paper. Several more minutes passed. Finally, he started writing. Adrian. His hand stopped. Immediately Hector frowned. What exactly was he doing? Writing a letter? To a dead person? Had he completely lost his mind? He nearly crumpled the paper, then remembered Adrian's letters, and somehow continued. Today, I discovered another one of Cassian's hidden networks. Your investigation notes were useful. You were annoyingly thorough. I suppose that's a compliment. Hector stared at the page, then continued writing. I learned that 3 ministers have secretly begun fighting each other. I had nothing to do with it. Well, mostly, his lips twitched. The letters were never intended for anyone. No one would ever read them. Yet, somehow Hector found himself writing things he told nobody else. By the time he stopped, 3 pages were filled. None of it was particularly important. Just observations, thoughts, complaints, a detailed explanation of why several nobles were idiots, the sort of things one might casually tell a friend. The realization made him freeze. Friend. The word felt strange, unfamiliar, dangerous. Slowly, he folded the letter, then locked it away. He never intended for anyone to see it, not even himself. The next day, he wrote another, then another a few days later. I walked through your garden again. I believe the flower fairies are judging me. I have no proof, but I'm certain. Hector immediately folded that letter and hid it beneath several others. Then another. At some point it became a habit, a very embarrassing habit, one he intended to take to the grave. Meanwhile, the political situation continued deteriorating for Hector's enemies, not for Hector. Everything was progressing perfectly, too perfectly, which was why he should have noticed the training accident sooner. The Crown Prince had decided to personally inspect new knight recruits, partly because Adrian used to do it, partly because Hector wanted to understand the kingdom's military, mostly because he was bored. Watching recruits train quickly reminded him why instructors became angry. Half of them swung swords like they were trying to negotiate with the enemy. The other half appeared determined to accidentally kill themselves. One trainee somehow dropped his sword 3 times in a single minute. Hector was fascinated. The young man was making mistakes Hector hadn't known were physically possible. Then disaster struck. A recruit lost control during a practice exchange. The wooden sword flew from his hand. The instructors reacted immediately, but not fast enough. The sword clipped Hector's forearm. A shallow cut. Nothing serious. Not even enough to require healing magic. The entire training ground froze. The recruit immediately turned white. Several knights looked ready to execute him on the spot. Hector glanced at the wound. A thin line of blood appeared. The recruit nearly fainted. Your Highness, he exclaimed in fear. It's fine. It was an accident. It's fine, relax. I'm so sorry, the terrified recruit apologized. It's still fine. The poor recruit looked seconds away from crying. Hector reassured everyone, accepted apologies, even encouraged the terrified trainee, then calmly left. The moment he returned to his chambers, he slammed the door shut. The servants outside nearly jumped. Inside the room, Hector stared at the cut. His expression darkened. His anger rose instantly, violently, shockingly, to a degree that genuinely startled him. Not because it hurt. It barely registered. In his previous life, Hector had suffered broken bones, gunshot wounds, stab wounds, poisonings, life-threatening injuries. He had stitched himself together in abandoned buildings. He had continued fighting while bleeding. Pain never bothered him. But this was different, completely different. His gaze remained fixed on a cut on Adrian's arm, a wound on Adrian's body. And for some reason, it felt wrong, deeply wrong, as though something precious had been damaged. The feeling unsettled him. Hector, he spoke aloud, trying to reason with himself. It's a scratch. The anger remained. It's not even serious. Still there. Heal it and move on. Still there. Eventually, he used healing magic. The wound vanished instantly. Only then did the knot in his chest slowly loosen. Hector sat heavily in a chair, confused, annoyed, concerned. What is wrong with me? The answer was obvious. He simply refused to acknowledge it. That night, he wrote another letter. Longer than usual. Much longer. Today somebody injured your arm. It was a small cut. I healed it immediately. Then he added, I know it's technically my arm now. The pen stopped for a very long time. Then he continued writing. But somehow that doesn't feel entirely true. The words surprised him because they were honest, more honest than he intended. His gaze drifted toward the window. Moonlight illuminated the room. Silence filled the air. A strange thought entered his mind. If Adrian were alive, what would he think about all this? Would he laugh? Would he find it ridiculous? Would he think Hector had finally lost his mind? The image of Adrian laughing appeared effortlessly, warm, bright, happy, and once again Hector felt that familiar ache, that impossible longing, the desire to meet someone who no longer existed, to hear their voice, to see their face. Just once, the feeling frightened him, not because it was painful, because it was precious. And Hector Carmine had spent his entire life avoiding anything precious. Precious things could be taken away, destroyed, used against you. That was the lesson his father taught him. Yet despite knowing all of that, he still found himself writing letters to a dead prince, still found himself protecting Adrian's memories. Because somewhere along the way, Adrian had stopped being merely a dead prince, stopped being merely the previous owner of this body, stopped being merely a memory. Without realizing it, Hector had begun caring, far too much. Things became worse a week later. The hidden room was unusually quiet that evening. Hector sat alone, reading one of Adrian's old journals. A terrible decision. He knew it was a terrible decision, yet he kept doing it. The journal detailed one of Adrian's birthdays. Apparently, nobody remembered. Not the king, not the nobles, not even most servants. Only a single elderly gardener had given him a gift, a flower. That was all. One flower. Adrian had written 3 pages about how happy it made him. Hector closed the journal, slowly, very slowly, then stood up, then sat down again, then stood up once more. A flower. One flower. That was all it took. The thought made something painful twist inside him, because Adrian had never asked for much. Not power, not wealth, not influence, not praise. Just simple things. Things most people took for granted. And somehow life had denied him even those. Hector suddenly found himself wishing, not for the first time, that he could have met Adrian. Just once. Just long enough to tell him he wasn't alone. The thought appeared naturally, effortlessly, as though it had always existed. And that realization frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Because Hector Carmine had spent his entire life convinced he was incapable of forming such attachments. Yet here he was, missing someone he had never met, grieving someone he never knew, writing letters to someone who could never answer, and caring about someone so much that even a small cut on his arm made Hector irrationally angry. The former king of the Underworld covered his eyes, then laughed, a quiet, tired laugh. Disbelieving. If my old enemies could see me now, the greatest criminal mastermind of his era, outplayed by a dead prince. And the worst part? Adrian wasn't even trying. Far away, hidden within another kingdom, Cassian Valmont received urgent news. The Crown Prince had accepted the military deployment, exactly as planned. Cassian smiled. Soon Adrian Aurelius would finally die. Everything was proceeding according to schedule. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that while Cassian was preparing to kill the Crown Prince, the former king of the Underworld had already prepared a trap of his own. And when 2 master manipulators finally met, one of them was about to discover that the most dangerous enemy in the world was not a king, not an army, not a kingdom, but a man with nothing left to lose. And Hector was beginning to realize there was one thing he absolutely refused to lose, even if that thing was already gone. The dead prince he intended to avenge had already become the most important person in his life. Chapter 7, The Fall of the Spider. The day Crown Prince Adrian departed for the Northern Front, the capital was filled with prayers. People lined the streets before sunrise, not because they feared losing a prince, because they genuinely loved him. As Hector rode through the city, countless voices wished for his safe return. For a moment, he understood why Adrian had endured everything. These people were the answer. Not everyone shared those feelings. Watching from above, The queen wore a sorrowful expression, but Hector noticed a faint relief hidden behind her eyes. She believed she was sending Adrian to his death. Hector simply smiled. Soon, everyone standing beside her would discover they had been celebrating far too early. The journey north was uneventful, at least from Hector's perspective. Ambushes failed before they began. Poison supplies never reached the camp. Traitors exposed themselves. None of it surprised Hector. He had spent nearly a year preparing, and while he marched toward the battlefield, another war had already begun. Across the continent, trade agreements collapsed. Governors resigned. Intelligence networks disappeared. Noble alliances fractured. Cashin's web, built over 20 years, was slowly coming apart, not by force, by distrust. Hector understood criminals better than anyone. People protected secrets, but they feared betrayal. He simply made them suspect each other, and they destroyed themselves. By the time Hector arrived at the northern front, Cashin's empire was already suffering internal damage. Unfortunately for Cashin, the worst was yet to come, because the battlefield itself was about to become a disaster. For everyone except Hector, the enemy alliance launched their attack exactly as planned. 3 nations, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, elite mages, war beasts, siege engines. Everything had been carefully coordinated. The objective was simple: force Adrian into a situation where survival became impossible. A trap designed to bury Adrian Aurelius forever. Unfortunately for the enemies, Adrian was no longer the one standing there. It was Hector Carmine, and Hector had spent months studying magic, not merely learning it, improving, expanding, and reimagining it. Adrian had already possessed extraordinary magical knowledge. Many of his personal research projects had been unfinished, theoretical, ideas without practical completion. Hector completed them. His previous world had provided something unique: concepts, weapons, engineering principles, methods of destruction unknown to this world, where most mages imagined fireballs and lightning bolts. Hector imagined artillery, shockwaves, chain reactions, pressure systems, energy transfer. Adrian's magical genius provided the foundation. Hector's imagination supplied the design. The result was terrifying. The battle began at dawn. It ended before midnight. Historians would later spend decades debating what they had witnessed, because the battlefield itself exploded. Massive magical shockwaves erupted beneath advancing formations. Entire sections of ground collapsed. A mana resonance disruption field caused magical backlash, incapacitated hundreds of enemy mages instantly. The enemy's coordinated spell formation collapsed. Everything happened next was just pure, terrific destruction. The resulting destruction shattered morale. By noon, panic had begun spreading through the Allied armies. By evening, they were retreating. By nightfall, the war was over. The soldiers who survived would speak of that day for the rest of their lives. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a legend. The kingdom's knights stood among the ruins of the battlefield in stunned silence. None of them had ever witnessed warfare on such a scale. None of them had imagined a single individual could influence a battle so completely. Even the most experienced commanders struggled to comprehend what they had seen. At the center of the devastated battlefield stood the Crown Prince. His white hair moved gently in the evening wind. His sword remained unstained. His expression remained calm. Behind him stretched the remains of 3 defeated armies. Before him stood thousands of soldiers staring with awe. For the first time in centuries, people began whispering a new title. Not Crown Prince, not First Heir, not Magic Swordsman. A far older title, one reserved for figures who appeared only once every few generations. A title belonging to living legends. The Calamity King. That same night, while the camp celebrated, Hector summoned every general. "The war is not over," Hector started. Confused faces filled the room. One old commander finally asked, "But, Your Highness, we've already won." Hector smiled. We won a battle. I intend to win the next 100 years. His finger moved across the map. They attacked because they believed war was profitable. Then we will make it the greatest mistake in their history. What followed after was not conquest, not occupation, politics, trade, information. Within months, the alliance that invaded his kingdom collapsed from within. Kings blamed ministers. Ministers blamed nobles. Nobles blamed each other. Entire governments crumbled without another sword being drawn. History would remember it as a 3-month collapse. And somewhere beyond the borders, Cassian Valmont finally became afraid. Not of defeat, but of the unknown, because someone was dismantling him piece by piece. Someone who understood him, perhaps better than he understood himself. Then came the final blow. Returning to one of his hidden estates, Cassian froze. A silver-haired man sat calmly in his chair, drinking tea. "I've been looking forward to meeting you," Hector said. For the first time in 20 years, Cassian felt genuine shock. The conversation lasted an hour. No magic, no swords, no threats, because Hector had already won. And now Cassian finally understood. The game had ended before he realized he was losing. For the first time in 20 years, the mastermind had been outplayed. Completely. So this is the end. Cassian asked, "Will you kill me?" Hector shook his head. "No. Death is too merciful." He placed a single document on the table. Cassian's face turned pale. Everything was gone. His fortune, network, influence, his identity. 20 years of work erased. Completely erased. No legacy. No successors. No history. Nothing. My empire. Hector looked at him calmly. "You never had an empire. You were a parasite living through others. And parasites leave no monuments. So I took them all away." For the first time in his life, Cassian found himself truly alone. "Why?" he whispered. "Why destroy me like this?" Hector rose to his feet. His answer was simple. "Because you touched someone precious to me. And I don't do things halfway." The door closed, and from that day onward, history forgot the name Cassian Valmont, a far crueler fate than death. Weeks later, Hector returned to the capital, only to discover the palace had already begun collapsing from within. The Queen's faction was gone, corrupt nobles arrested, their allies turning against one another, evidence appearing from every corner. Many believed the king's investigators deserved the credit. Only Hector knew. Those dominoes had been arranged months ago. Now, all that remained was rebuilding. Standing beneath the stars at night, he looked toward the garden Adrian loved. A soft breeze passed through the flowers. Hector smiled. "You were too kind for this place. But don't worry. I fixed it." And for the first time since arriving in this world, Hector felt peace. Not because he had won, but because he believed that somewhere Adrian would smile at the kingdom that remained, the kingdom he had always wanted. Chapter 8. The smile he never saw. Despite everything that Hector had accomplished, there was one place Hector found himself returning to again and again, the hidden room inside the garden. One evening, shortly after returning from the war, Hector entered the room alone. The familiar scent of flowers greeted him. The chair beside the window remained where Adrian had always left it. The tea table was untouched. The pressed flowers were still carefully stored. Everything looked exactly the same, as if Adrian might walk through the door at any moment. Hector sat down in the chair. For a long time, he simply stared out the window. Then he sighed. Well, silence answered him. He almost smiled. "You really left me with a mess." The words escaped naturally, as if he were speaking to someone sitting across from him. And perhaps, in a way, he was... Hector leaned back. "The Queen is gone. The nobles who targeted you are gone. The people who poisoned you are gone." His voice remained calm, matter of fact, yet something softer existed beneath it. The kingdom is stable. The border nations will not recover for decades. Cashin no longer exists. A small smile appeared. I was rather thorough. Silence followed. Then Hector laughed quietly. You know, I spent my entire life avoiding other people's problems. He stared at the ceiling. If it wasn't my business, I ignored it. If it didn't affect me, I walked away. If someone was suffering, I usually assumed it was not my responsibility. His gaze drifted toward the garden. But then there was you. The smile faded. I never met you. Not once. We never spoke. We were never friends. You were already gone before I arrived. He looked at his hands. And somehow I ended up destroying half a continent for your sake. The absurdity of it made him laugh. A genuine laugh. You would probably find that concerning. The room remained silent. Yet for some reason Hector felt less alone. Eventually he stood. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. Rest peacefully, Adrian. Then he paused. For reasons he couldn't explain. Everything is all right now. Only after saying those words did he leave. The following 2 years transformed the kingdom. Trade flourished. New roads connected distant provinces. Education expanded. Corruption became increasingly difficult to hide. Commoners gained opportunities previously reserved for nobles. The people adored their crown prince. Many began calling him the greatest heir the kingdom had ever produced. The irony wasn't lost on Hector. Most of the praise belonged to Adrian, as Hector merely completed what Adrian had always wanted. Then one day Hector visited the king's chambers. No attendants were present. No records were kept. No one knew what was discussed. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. When Hector finally left, the king looked 10 years older, but strangely relieved. 2 days later, the entire kingdom received shocking news. The king would abdicate. Prince Adrian Aurelius would inherit the throne. The coronation ceremony would take place in 1 month. The kingdom erupted in celebration. There was one final matter Hector needed to settle. The second prince, his half-brother, the son of the former queen. The boy was barely 17. Unlike his mother, he possessed no political ambition, no hunger for power nor desire for the throne. After years of investigation, Hector knew this better than anyone. The boy genuinely wanted only one thing: knowledge, books, research, learning. When Hector entered the prince's study, he found him buried beneath a mountain of books. The young prince nearly fell out of his chair. Brother, Hector glanced at the books. History, mathematics, astronomy, magic theory. Then he looked at the terrified boy. A harmless scholar trapped inside a royal family. The situation was almost tragic. Almost. Sit. The prince immediately obeyed. Hector sat opposite him. Do you want the throne? The boy nearly choked. No, he exclaimed. Good. The prince blinked. Good. He questioned, confused. Because if you ever decide you want it, I will personally throw you into the ocean. Hector answered back. The boy stared. Hector stared back. The prince quickly nodded. I don't want it. Excellent. The tension vanished instantly. Then Hector slid several documents across the table. Scholarship approvals, university invitations, research grants. The prince's eyes widened. A foreign academy? Yes, one of the best on the continent. The boy looked ready to cry. Really? Yes. You're sending me there? I'm removing you from politics before politics finds a way to ruin you. The prince looked suspiciously emotional. Hector stood. Before leaving, he added, become a great scholar. The prince smiled, a genuine smile. I will. For once, Hector believed someone completely. Several months later, something unexpected happened. Completely by accident, Hector was organizing materials inside the secret room when a loose floorboard shifted. Something rolled from a crack between the stones. A recording crystal, dust-covered, forgotten, hidden for years. Curious, Hector activated it. The room immediately filled with light. Then, chaos, absolute chaos. Flower fairies flew everywhere. The recording shook violently. Someone was clearly struggling to hold the crystal properly. Stop moving. Adrian's voice echoed through the room. Hector froze. The crystal nearly slipped from his hand. For the first time, he heard Adrian. Not a memory, not an imagined voice. Actually heard him. The recording continued. I am trying to record the flowers. A fairy flew directly into the crystal. Everything became blurry. Another fairy stole the crystal. Someone screamed. Several fairies laughed. The entire recording became a disaster. And then, the image stabilized. Adrian appeared. For a moment, Hector forgot how to breathe, because Adrian was smiling. Not the polite smile from portraits. Not the diplomatic smile shown to nobles. Not the calm smile displayed before the public. A real smile. Bright, warm, effortless, beautiful. Then one of the fairies said something. Hector never remembered what, because Adrian started laughing. A full laugh, unrestrained, genuine, the kind of laugh that reaches eyes. For several seconds, Hector simply stared. Every imagined version of Adrian shattered instantly, because none of them came close, not even remotely. He had imagined Adrian smiling countless times, and he had been wrong every single time, it seems, because the reality was infinitely worse, or perhaps better. He never decided which. All he knew was that something in his chest hurt, and he couldn't look away. The recording ended. Hector immediately played it again. Then again. Then again. Hours passed. The sun set. Night arrived. The crystal continued replaying, and Hector remained seated, watching, listening, memorizing. By the end of the week, he knew every detail, every smile, every expression, laugh, movement, word, every glance. If someone had asked how many times Adrian blinked during the recording, Hector could probably answer, and that realization should have alarmed him. Instead, he simply replayed the crystal again. 1 month later came the coronation. The entire capital gathered. Golden banners filled the city. Church bells echoed across the kingdom. Nobles arrived from every province. Foreign dignitaries traveled from distant nations. When Hector entered the grand hall wearing the royal regalia of Aurelius, thousands fell silent. The ceremony lasted hours. The oaths were spoken. The crown was presented. The king placed it upon his head. And before the eyes of the world, Adrian Aurelius became king. The people erupted into celebration. The kingdom entered a new era. And for the first time in many years, hope became stronger than fear. That night Hector dreamed. It was not unusual. What was unusual was who appeared. Adrian, standing inside the garden, smiling. That same smile from the recording. The one Hector had watched hundreds of times. The dream ended almost immediately. Yet when Hector woke up, his first thought was not about politics, not about governing, not about enemies. It was about Adrian's smile. A few weeks later, the dreams returned. Then again, and again. At first, Adrian simply smiled. Then he laughed. Then they spoke. Nothing important. Simple conversations. Meaningless conversations. The sort of conversations Hector wished they could have had. And each time Hector woke up feeling both happy and miserable, because no matter how vivid the dream became, it was still only a dream, a reminder of something he could never have, someone he could never meet, someone whose smile had somehow become the most dangerous thing Hector Carmine had ever encountered, far more dangerous than assassins, far more dangerous than kings, far more dangerous than war, because unlike those things, he never wanted to escape from this. Chapter 9. The Man Who Could Not Let Go. The years following Hector's coronation were peaceful, or at least peaceful by the standards of a man who had once spent his life dismantling criminal empires. The kingdom prospered. Trade flourished. The people loved their king. Crime dropped. The borders remained secure. Foreign nations sought alliances rather than conflict. Everything Adrian had once dreamed of slowly became reality. By all accounts, Hector should have been content. Yet there was one problem that refused to leave him. Adrian, not the memory of Adrian, not the responsibility he felt toward Adrian, not even the grief. Something much worse. Something much more dangerous. Love. It began with a simple discussion during court. One of the older ministers stepped forward. "Your Majesty." Hector looked up from the documents. "Speak." The old man smiled. "The kingdom is stable. It is... The people are prosperous. They are..." The minister nodded. "There remains only one concern." Hector already knew where this was going, and immediately regretted attending court that day. "We believe it is time your Majesty considered marriage." Silence. The court collectively held its breath. Hector stared at the minister. The minister smiled nervously. Several nobles looked hopeful. Others immediately began calculating potential alliances. One particularly ambitious duke looked ready to offer all three of his daughters. Hector slowly placed down the report he was reading, then asked calmly, "Why?" The minister blinked. "Your Majesty, why would I want to marry?" The poor man looked completely unprepared for the question. "For companionship?" "Not necessarily needed." "Then for an heir?" "I already have successors." "For political stability?" "The kingdom is currently more stable than it was ever before." The minister's confidence visibly weakened. Several nobles looked like they wanted to hide under the table. Finally, the minister attempted one last argument. "Marriage is natural, your Majesty." Hector considered this, then frowned, because the moment he imagined marriage, his mind rejected it entirely. The image felt wrong, not unpleasant, wrong, like trying to force two puzzle pieces together when they clearly did not belong. Then he understood why. Because whenever he imagined standing beside another person, the image automatically changed. Silver hair, blue eyes, a warm smile. Adrian, always Adrian. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he denied it, it was always Adrian. The realization struck him harder than any battlefield ever had, and for the first time in years, Hector Carmine found himself completely defeated. That night, he sat alone inside the hidden room. The recording crystal rested in his hand. The same crystal, the same recording, the same smile. He had long since lost count of how many times he watched it. At some point, counting had become pointless. The image appeared once more. Adrian laughing as several flower fairies stole his gardening tools. The recording shook violently. One fairy could be heard accusing Adrian of favoritism toward roses. Another was loudly demanding equal flower rights. The argument made absolutely no sense. Adrian laughed anyway, and Hector felt his heart tighten. Again, the feeling should have faded by now. It never did. If anything, it became worse. The crystal finally dimmed. Darkness returned. Hector leaned his head back against the wall, then quietly laughed at himself. What exactly am I supposed to do with this? No answer came. There never was one, because Adrian was gone, and no amount of power could change that. The dreams became worse, or perhaps better. Hector could no longer decide. At first they were simple. Conversations, walks through the garden, quiet evenings, small moments. Then slowly they changed. The distance between them disappeared. The conversations became softer, more personal, more intimate. The sort of intimacy Hector had never allowed himself to experience with anyone. The sort of intimacy he never realized he wanted until now. And every morning he woke carrying pieces of those dreams with him, like fragments of a life that never existed. A life he wished had existed. One night the dream felt unusually vivid. The royal chamber was quiet. Moonlight filtered through tall windows. White silk curtains moved gently in the night breeze. Hector sat upon the edge of the bed, and there was Adrian standing before him, bathed in silver moonlight. For a moment, Hector thought the moon itself had taken human form. The light wrapped around Adrian's figure so naturally that he seemed almost unreal, beautiful, peaceful, untouchable. Yet he was smiling, not the smile from a recording, not the smile shown to nobles and citizens. A smile meant only for Hector. Neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another as though words had become unnecessary, and all the time in the world exists just for them, as though nothing else existed beyond that room. Their gazes met, and somehow it felt like a conversation. 1,000 unspoken things passing between them. Regrets, longing, affection, the things neither could say aloud. The things Hector wished he could have said. Slowly he raised his hand, almost afraid the dream would shatter. His fingertips brushed Adrian's cheek. Soft, warm, real, far too real. Adrian's eyes softened. Then he leaned gently into Hector's palm. A simple gesture, yet it unraveled every remaining piece of Hector's self-control. His heart pounded violently. Adrian never looked away. Never once. As though he could see every secret Hector tried to hide. Then Adrian placed a hand against Hector's chest, directly over his heart, feeling its frantic rhythm. A small smile appeared, not mocking, not teasing, knowing, as though he understood exactly what effect he had. That smile alone nearly destroyed Hector. He had faced kings, assassins, generals, entire nations. Nothing had ever left him this helpless. Adrian leaned closer. Hector did the same. The distance between them vanished. Their foreheads nearly touched. Their noses brushed lightly against one another. And for one perfect moment, everything felt complete. Then Hector woke. His eyes snapped open. The room was dark, silent, real. His heart was still racing, his breath uneven, and Adrian was gone. Again, the familiar ache returned immediately, stronger than ever. Hector sat motionless for several minutes, trying and failing to regain composure. Then his gaze shifted toward the mirror, the large floor-length mirror standing across the chamber. Moonlight illuminated the reflection. Silver hair, blue eyes, Adrian's face, his face, not Adrian's. Yet, in that moment, Hector forgot reality, forgot reason, forgot everything. He stood, almost without thinking, then slowly crossed the room, step by step, as though approaching someone precious, someone waiting for him. The loose silk robe hung carelessly from one shoulder. His long white hair was still disheveled from sleep. The reflection moved with him, watching him, drawing him closer, until he stood directly before the mirror. His hand slowly rose and touched the glass. The reflection mirrored the gesture, palm against palm. For one terrible moment, Hector wished it were real, wished the person on the other side truly existed, wished he could finally reach him. His eyes closed briefly, filled with longing, with affection, with a love he could no longer deny. Then he leaned forward, and reality returned, like cold water. The reflection was not Adrian. It was himself, or rather, Adrian's body carrying Hector's soul. The realization stopped him immediately. His hand trembled, and a deep sense of guilt followed, because no matter how overwhelming his feelings had become, this was still Adrian's body, Adrian's face, Adrian's smile. How could he claim something that never belonged to him? How could he use the image of the person he loved for his own comfort? The thought alone felt unbearable. Hector stepped back, then another step, then slowly slid down the floor. He sat with his back against the mirror, unable to look at it anymore, unable to look at Adrian, unable to look at himself. For perhaps the first time in both his lives, Hector Carmine felt completely helpless. No strategy could solve this. No power could fix it. No victory could change it. He buried his face in his hands and finally spoke aloud. His voice carried a sorrow deeper, than any wound he had ever suffered. Adrian. The name alone hurt. My dear Adrian. A weak laugh escaped him. I always thought those words sounded ridiculous. He shook his head. Sweetheart, darling, my heart. I heard people use them all the time. I thought they were embarrassing. Thought I would never say them to anyone. His eyes closed, but now his voice grew softer. I want to call you every endearment that exists. I want to tell you how precious you are to me, how much I cherish you, how much I miss you. His fingers tightened slightly, but I don't have your permission, and I never will, because you're already beyond my reach. Silence followed. Then he laughed again, a broken laugh, self-deprecating, bitter. How ridiculous! Hector Carmine, the man who could obtain almost anything he wanted, the man who never desired anything. And now, his voice cracked slightly, now I've finally found the one thing I want, the only thing I've ever truly wanted, and it is the one thing I can never have. The room remained silent, yet he continued speaking, because no one was there to hear him, except perhaps a ghost. I never thought I would fall in love, much less with man, much less with someone I've never truly met. His eyes drifted upward, toward the moonlight, toward memories, toward dreams, toward Adrian. And yet here I am, like a fool, a pathetic man. Hopeless affection filled his expression, the kind that could not be hidden anymore, the kind that had already become part of him. Tell me, Adrian. A faint smile appeared, small, fragile, painfully sincere. If you could see me now, would you be disgusted? Would you laugh at me? Would you pity me? His voice softened into almost a whisper. Or would you accept this fool's heart? The silence felt endless. Then Hector lowered his head, and finally spoke the truth he had spent years trying not to acknowledge. Adrian, my love. No answer came, yet somehow saying it aloud felt both devastating and relieving, as though a truth buried deep within him had finally been allowed to breathe, and alone beneath the moonlight, the king who had conquered kingdoms, the man who had defeated every enemy before him, finally surrendered to the one battle he could never win, the battle of loving someone he could never reach.
The tragedy for Hector is no longer that Adrian is gone. The tragedy is that Adrian had become the center of his heart long after his death, and every year that passes only makes that love deeper rather than weaker. Thank you for listening to part 2 of The Villain Who Falls in Love with a Dead Prince. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what lies ahead for the villain who inherited a prince's life. And until we meet again, may your hearts remain gentle, and may fate be kinder to those who learn to love too late. See you in part 3.